Okay, so universities are proverbially liberal, whatever exactly that means. And, it is thought that this has to do with some kind of conspiracy or that it has to do with, some kind of inveterate, deeply seated hatred on the part of academicians for society. No. What it has to do with is very simple. Okay, in this day and age, the path of least resistance is to be liberal in the relevant sense of the word. Okay, suppose that some professor took some right wing position. I mean, he could do it, okay, but it would be an uphill battle. Okay, just suppose for argument's sake, and I'm not saying that it would be good for him to do this, but suppose he advocated some kind of racial separatism, or that he advocated the elimination of affirmative action. That's a completely reasonable. I mean, I utterly support that. Utterly. Okay, I'll be totally honest about that. Suppose he said that, he would have his work cut out for him. He could not just coast. He would really, really, really have to work. Okay, but suppose he just takes the kind of blobby, amorphous position of, well, whatever is happening, it's a-okay, and I support Obama or whoever. Or suppose he, so he either takes that position or he takes no position. And actually, those are both ways of taking no position. Well, then he doesn't have to do anything, right? And professors in this day and age, and I think to a very considerable extent at all times, but 100% in this day and age, don't do anything. That's what it's about. Okay, there have been times, now there's no inherent connection between being a liberal and taking the path of least resistance. I mean, there have been times when being a liberal involved taking the path of most resistance. There have been times when being a conservative or being even right-wing, and conservatism and right-wingism are different things for reasons that I'll discuss in a moment. But there have certainly been times when those were the path those were the path of least resistance. I mean, in fact, ultimately, whatever is the path of least resistance is the conservative path, and that's a very, very important point. I mean, the hippies from the '60s are today's old guard. I mean, they are the utter conservatives. I mean, it's true that that they wear tie dye, or that they have bumper stickers and use slogans that are associated with what might at one point have plausibly been taken, however erroneously, to be liberal causes, but that's totally irrelevant. I mean, that's just, whether a person is liberal or conservative or this or that has nothing to do with, what kind of T-shirts they're wearing, or the specific slogans that they're advocating. And so, I mean, is Donald Trump conservative? No, he's not conservative at all. He's right wing, but that's very different from being conservative. And I mean, he's anti-conservative. I mean, every single media outlet, and maybe the right to oppose him, but every single one, with rare exceptions, is opposing him pretty vigorously. And whatever is anti-establishment is ipso facto not conservative. Okay, so he's not conservative. Now, this is not to say that his views are good, or that they're bad, or that they're this or that, but that is a fact. So say what you will, he's not conservative. He's a different thing. I mean, conservatism is about keeping things the way they were 5 years ago. Now, right-wingism, whatever the hell that is a very different thing. And so, right-wingism, real right-wingism, tends to involve kind of a combination of elements. To some extent, it's about wanting things the way they were 500 years ago, and to some extent, it's about wanting things in some way that they've never been, but that has some kind of perceived, though usually not actual, basis in how they were a long time ago. But right-wingism and conservatism are very different things. Was Hitler conservative? No, he was anti-conservative, but he was obviously right-wing, at least in some respects. And I mean, the chancellor, or whoever who preceded him, what was conservative, actually, and that is a very significant distinction. And one thing about, so there are evil right-wing people, there are evil left-wing people. I mean, radically evil left-wing people, and radically evil right-wing people also, obviously. I mean, in this day and age where there are not too many right-wing people. I mean, maybe in Central Asia there are, maybe, but not so much in these parts, not so much in the Western world at all. But in this day and age, I mean, when we have to deal with institutional necrosis, when we have to deal with dysfunctional institutions, they're institutions that are nominally liberal. But liberalism has no monopoly by any stretch of the imagination on evil. In any case, but back to the original point, professors are not anything, right? And if you want to not be anything in this day and age, the way to not be anything is to be quote unquote liberal, which has virtually no meaning. In fact, it has negative meaning because there's a perceived meaning, which is galaxies from reality. All right, there it is. And on a final note, actually, so, many of my listeners probably find themselves in arguments with people who self-describe as liberal. Bear in mind the following point when this happens. Okay, your disagreement, whether you know it or not, your disagreement with such people is not with their values. Your disagreement is not with liberal values. Your disagreement is with the absence of values masquerading as values. Okay, if people who claim to be liberal actually had liberal values, none of the problems that are associated with liberalism would exist right now. And that's an important thing. So the problem with quote unquote liberalism is not that it's liberalism, it's that it's not liberalism that's pretending to be liberalism. So there's nothing wrong with liberal values. I mean, maybe there are some things wrong with them, but there are some things wrong with any given set of values. The problem with supposed liberalism is that it's just kind of psychopathy that has availed itself of this snakeskin of liberal slogans.